Well, hello and welcome back to another edition of Critical Thinking for Mormons. My name is Paul Douglas and I'm your host. This week, we're going to begin our discussion of logical fallacies employed by leaders past and present of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, her apologists, and rank and file members. One of the most common and often misunderstood logical fallacies is the ad hominem. The ad hominem is a rhetorical strategy where the speaker attacks the character, motive, or some other attribute of the person making the argument, rather than attacking the substance of the argument itself. Ad hominem literally means to the man. It is attacking the opponent personally instead of his or her arguments. In truth, the character of the person making the argument doesn't affect the veracity of the argument or the validity of their inferences. Sometimes an individual will utilize the ad hominem argument because they want to appeal to a person's emotions. Perhaps you wouldn't feel that way if you weren't Muslim. My opponent suggests that lowering taxes is a good idea, but this is coming from a woman who just inherited $50 million. In a dispute with Cicero, Metellus Nepos asked Cicero repeatedly, "Who is your father? Who is your father?" The implication being that since Cicero was a bastard, his case and his argument should not be accepted. The ad hominem is a personal attack, made against the person rather than their argument. It's against their character or their judgment, or it focuses on their personal lives. It's very common, perhaps the most common logical fallacy. Turn on any political talk program and you'll witness at least one or two instances of it. Rabid right-winger, crazy liberal, insane conservative. Politics is perhaps the arena where we see the most egregious use of the ad hominem, but high school is a close second. The reigning king of the ad hominem attack, it would seem, is Donald Trump.
Right now, today, as a candidate, he supports federal taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. I disagree with him on that. That's a matter of principle, and I'll tell you. You are the single biggest liar. You probably are worse than Jeb Bush. You are the single biggest liar. All right. This guy lied. Let me just tell you, this guy lied about Ben Carson when he took votes away from Ben Carson in Iowa. And he just continues. This guy will say anything. Nasty guy. Now I know why he doesn't have one endorsement from any of his colleagues. All right, John, I get to respond. Pick from the buffet there. He's a nasty guy.
Last week in Rolling Stone magazine, Donald Trump said the following about you, quote, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? Can you imagine that, the face of our next president?" Mr. Trump later said he was talking about your persona, not your appearance. Please feel free to respond what you think about his persona.
You know, it's interesting to me. Mr. Trump said that he heard Mr. Bush very clearly and what Mr. Bush said. I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
An ad hominem argument is simply irrelevant. It doesn't contribute anything to the original argument itself. It only says something about the person making it, although it says rather more about the abuser employing the ad hominem. The point again is that the character of the person making the argument doesn't affect the truth of the argument or the validity of the inference. Pointing out that your opponent is cruel or is prone to kick dogs or drown kittens represents a personal attack, and unless you're debating animal cruelty, is irrelevant to the point that he's making. These are all ways of dismissing a person's argument by attacking their character. Having said that, there is a difference between an ad hominem attack or insult and an ad hominem logical fallacies. It's important to note that not all ad hominems are fallacies. This is not a distinction without a difference. As critical thinkers, we need to recognize the dissimilarity. In the case of an ad hominem attack, the form is, "You're wrong and you're an idiot." In an ad hominem fallacy, the form is, "You're wrong because you're an idiot." It's easy to assume that Donald Trump's penchant for name-calling means that he's constantly engaged in ad hominem fallacies. But the truth is a little bit more nuanced than that. Just to be fair and balanced, Democrats are also just as guilty of hurling insults. Congressman Darrell Issa called White House spokesman Jay Carney a paid liar. And of course there was Michelle Wolf's particularly abusive ad hominem attack on Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
I actually really like Sarah. I think she's very resourceful. Like, she burns facts, and then she uses that ash to create a perfect smoky eye. Like, maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's lies. It's probably lies.
The logical form of the ad hominem is person A is claiming Y. Person A is ignorant, liar, or some other pejorative. Therefore, Y is not true. An example is a smug, rich Volvo mom like you can't understand what it's like to grow up black in America. You have no right to argue about violence on our streets. A different type of ad hominem fallacy is the circumstantial ad hominem. Here we suggest that our opponent's personal circumstances motivate that person's arguments, so it must be false. Person A is claiming Y is true. Person B claims that person A has a vested interest in claiming that Y is true. Therefore, Y is false. The ad hominem is one of the most common logical fallacies. We see examples of it everywhere. Here's a few examples to that effect. Attacking one's personal beliefs. The senator doesn't even belong to a church. How can he claim to be a Christian? Or attacking your opponent's belief structure. Of course you'd say that. You're one of those pro-lifers and have never looked at alternative facts. Or generalizing views of a political party to insult an individual who is a member of that party. Well, it's pretty obvious that your political party doesn't know how to be fiscally responsible, so I guess I can't expect you to be. Or relying on a person's socioeconomic status to oppose that person's opinion. Jill, you can't understand since you've never had to struggle. Or using an opponent's education or lack thereof as a means to exploit and damage their argument. You didn't even finish high school. How can you possibly know anything about this? Or relying on one's age to preclude them from making an intelligent argument. You're just too young to understand. One day you'll get it. Or selecting gender as a means to devaluate an argument from the opposite gender. This is a female issue. You're a man. You can't have an opinion about this. Or using marital status to invalidate an opinion. How can you even discuss this? You've never been married. Or stating that someone's argument is wrong because of their religious beliefs. Well, she's a Mormon, so of course she thinks that way. Or asserting that someone's geography prevents them from being able to make a clear judgment. You're a big city girl. The issues that matter in Americans' heartland are clearly beyond your comprehension. Attacking a defendant's character. Or attacking the opponent's sexual orientation in an argument about LGBTQ rights. The only reason you could possibly be in favor of this is that you can't be honest about your own sexuality. Something that's true but shows the church in anything but a positive light is immediately deemed anti-Mormon. This is a way of keeping people from examining unflattering facts about the church. Bottom line, the facts speak for themselves regardless of who says them and why. Don't shoot the messenger. Many of the examples I've just given you could be classified as ad hominem circumstantial. Another example, my bishop, who I respect, says the church is true. Of course your bishop says the church is true. They wouldn't have made him bishop if he wasn't church broke. Mrs. Jones, I think the teacher of the year should get a special parking place. Student, of course you would, Mrs. Jones. You're the teacher of the year. Or, Senator Kelly says it's in our country's best interest to expand oil production. Well, she would say that. Her state benefits most from oil production. Another form of the ad hominem is guilt by association. The logical form is person A states that Y is true. Person B also states that Y is true, and person B is a pejorative. Therefore, person A must be a fool too. A guilt by association fallacy occurs when someone connects their opponent to a bad person or a demonized group of people in order to discredit his or her argument. The idea is that person is guilty by simply being similar to this bad group and therefore should not be listened to. David Duke was a leader of the KKK. David Duke endorsed Donald Trump. Therefore, you should not vote for Donald Trump. Here's another couple of examples. Janet, I believe in equal pay for equal work. Bob, Janet is a big supporter of equal pay for equal work. This is the same policy that all those crazy extremist feminist groups support. Extremists like Janet shouldn't be taken seriously. Or, Janet, I think the vegetarian diet is best. Bob, You know who else believed in vegetarianism? Adolf Hitler. In fact, there's a whole fallacy related to Hitler. Users of this type of ad hominem often use figurative language such as sarcasm or humor, either as a persuasive device or to attack the opponent for his or her behavior. Occasional humorous ad hominem can be the spice of life. I love it when RFM refers to Elder Ballard as his favorite car salesman. The ad hominem has always been a favorite in the Mormon Church. I think it was the first logical fallacy used in Mormonism. In Joseph Smith's third iteration of his first vision, the one that now appears in the Pearl of Great Price, he says, I asked the personages who stood above me in the light which of all the sects was right, for at that time it had never entered my heart that all were wrong, and which I should join. I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong, and the personage who addressed me said all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they drew near to me with their lips, but their hearts were far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. Joseph Smith employed each of the ad hominem variants to a degree rarely witnessed in a public figure until the era of Donald Trump. When, for example, Martha Brotherington published her story relating to Smith's attempts at seduction in the St. Louis Bulletin in July of 1842, the Nauvoo Wasp, in its next edition, edited by the prophet's brother, on August the 27th, 1842, both denied that any such marriage proposals ever took place and branded Martha as a mean harlot. In early April 1842, when Nancy Rigdon was a little too loose-lipped about her rejection of the prophet's advances, Smith persuaded a good friend to write, Nancy was guilty of unlawful and illicit intercourse, and a poor miserable girl out of the very sloth of prostitution. In another case, when the daughter of one of Smith's senior lieutenants, Sarah Pratt, spoke of Smith's indecent proposal, the prophet labeled her as a whore from her mother's breast. Joseph Smith's ad hominem attacks were certainly not reserved solely for his spurning suitors. In 1838, Joseph Smith called Cowdery, Harris, and Whitmer, who by that time had all abandoned him in the church, too mean to mention, and we had liked to have forgotten them. Smith also said about David Whitmer, specifically, God suffered such kind of beings to inflict Job, a dumb ass to ride, but David Whitmer, to forgive his madness when he goes up to curse Israel, and this ass not being of the same kind as Balaam, he brays out cursings instead of blessings. Poor ass. Joseph Smith's right-hand man and first counselor in the first presidency, Sidney Rigdon, was no less restrained in his condemnation of Oliver Cowdery, a lying, thieving, counterfeiting man who was united with a gang of counterfeiters, thieves, liars, and blacklegs in the deepest dye to deceive, cheat, and defraud the saints out of their property by every art and stratagem which wickedness could invent. Until the recent release of Netflix Murder Among the Mormons, Brent Metcalf had pursued a healthy, happy, and quiet life beyond Mormonism. But in 1994, he was at the center of a controversy following the publication of his book of essays entitled New Approaches to the Book of Mormon, Explorations in Critical Methodology. This work resulted in a flurry of criticism from the Church through its apologetic arm, the Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, FARMS, whose anonymous membership includes numerous professors at the church-owned Brigham Young University. The Church's reaction to this perceived threat provides a plethora of examples of ad hominem. The initial salvo came from BYU University professor William Hamblin, issuing the message that Metcalf is butthead. During the uproar, no less than Elder Dallin H. Oakes issued a statement saying that honest investigators will conclude that there are so many evidences that the Book of Mormon is an ancient text that they cannot confidently resolve the question against its authenticity, despite some unanswered questions that seem to support the negative determination. Pseudo-pious, shoddy pseudo-scholarship, deceptive and specious and distorted, were just a few of the barbs aimed at Metcalf and the 9 other contributors to the book. Hamlin also pointed out that Metcalf never attended college and accused him of being anti-Mormon and prone to pedantry. Metcalf's writings portray an academic immaturity which could benefit from a healthy dose of disciplined tutorage in a good undergraduate program. There's no shortage of ad hominem fallacies used by Mormon leaders as well as rank-and-file members today. A common circumstantial ad hominem often heard when someone announces that they no longer believe the Mormon Church to be true and that they're leaving it is, "So what commandment couldn't you live?" The implication is that an individual's decision to leave the Mormon Church must be a desire to sin, and not an honest and rational recognition or belief that the religion itself is absolutely false. Again, the attack is to the person, not to the decision. In reality, the character of the person making the argument doesn't affect the truth of the argument or the validity of the inference that the Mormon Church is false. There are myriad reasons why people choose to leave the LDS Church. If many of these reasons were known and respected by the membership at large, it would lead many more members to leave the church as well. Here are 7 typical ad hominem statements pointed at one leaving the church. "I can't believe how stupid you are. You still know it's true. When things get really bad for you, you'll come back. I just hope it doesn't take a tragedy to get you to repent. We're all praying that you'll have an experience that'll bring you back. Sometimes it takes the death of a child. I've heard you criticize the church so that you can justify your decision to leave. Sad. What happened? I'm so disappointed in you. I'm deeply saddened that you've surrendered to the beliefs of man, and most recently, of course, lazy learner." If the church and her apologists were to focus on the real reasons why people leave the church, it would just cause members to dig deeper and go down that rabbit hole even faster. So apologists and leaders must make up bogus reasons why people leave. Their ad hominem attacks on post-Mormons is an attempt to make them look unreasonable, weak, even evil. This is meant to frighten TBMs away from the rabbit hole because the church has no way of making the rabbit hole itself go away. Here's a few more ad hominems in which church leaders attack other churches. The Roman Catholic Church never had authority. It was founded by the devil. Protestant reformers did not restore the church. Their authority came from the Catholics, who only had the authority from the devil. That was Orson Pratt. We talk about Christianity, but it's a perfect pack of nonsense. It is a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. It is as corrupt as hell, and the devil could not invent a better engine to spread his work than Christianity of the 19th century. That was from the Journal of Discourses. It is also to the Book of Mormon to which we turn for the plainest description of the Catholic Church as the great and abominable church. Nephi saw this church, which is the most abominable above all other churches, in vision. He saw the devil, that he was the foundation of it, and also the murders, wealth, harlotry, persecutions, and evil desires that historically have been a part of this satanic organization. That was Bruce R. McConkie. Methodists are destitute of the spirit of righteousness, said Joseph Smith. I spoke of the impropriety of turning away from the truth and going after a people so destitute of the spirit of righteousness as the Methodists. That was Joseph Smith in the History of the Church in 1835. Orson Pratt also aimed a few of his ad hominems against the United States. Brethren, awake, be determined to get out of this evil nation next spring. We do not want one saint to be left in the United States after that time. Let every branch be determined to flee out of Babylon. What does the Christian world know about God? Nothing. Why, so far as the things of God are concerned, they are as veriest fools. They know neither God nor the things of God. That was John Taylor. What? Are Christians ignorant? Yes. As ignorant of the things of God as the brute beast. Again, John Taylor. Speaking in the third person, Taylor says, Brother Taylor has just said that the religions of the world were hatched in hell, and the eggs were laid in hell, hatched by its borders and kicked on the earth. Church leaders, of course, often use the labels apostate and anti-Mormon as dog whistles to warn members to discount any criticism of the church coming from them. Jeremy is a former member, an apostate from the church. His arguments against the Book of Abraham can't be considered valid or legitimate. He's just out to destroy the church. Simon Southerton, who published a book demonstrating how DNA disproves some claims of the Book of Mormon, was attacked because he had marital problems. Non-LDS Egyptologist Robert Rittner was attacked for his lack of religious belief. Michael Quinn was attacked because he was gay. Yes, I think it's fair to say that those in the post-Mormon community are also guilty from time to time of ad hominems. Here's a couple. I used to think that the people at Fair Mormon were just delusional, but with honest intentions. Now, after dealing with them for close to a year, they're not only delusional. That was Jeremy Runnels, of course, the author of Letter to a CES Director. Daniel Peterson seems to be a pathological deceiver. I don't know how else to explain his behavior. Crazy. That was John Dehlin, of course, the talent behind Mormon Stories. But by the 1970s, senior church leaders and their speechwriters had been well tutored in the avoidance of the definitional ad hominem, and were coached to replace it with the pejorative use of the sneering qualifier so-called. The phrase so-called suggests a rhetoric of falsity or deception in that being referenced. So-called distances the writer from the truth of what's been written and acts to undermine the phrase. Saying Darwin's so-called theory of evolution is being dismissive towards it. The following is a list of de facto ad hominems disguised through the use of the qualifier so-called. We warned you against the so-called polygamy cults, which would lead you astray. Today there are so many so-called Christian leaders who are divided over the most fundamental of all Christian doctrines. That was Gordon B. Hinckley in 1975, the humanists who criticize us, the so-called intellectuals who demean us. They are interested only in the so-called wisdom of the world, people who do not accept the Book of Mormon. That was Quentin L. Cook. Similarly, laws legalizing so-called same-sex marriage do not change God's law of marriage or his commandments and our standards concerning it. We remain under covenant to love God and keep his commandments and to refrain from serving other gods and priorities, even those becoming popular in our particular time and place. And that was Dallin H. Oakes in 2013. Here's another one by Oakes. These practitioners of so-called higher criticism raise the question of whether the Book of Mormon, which our prophets have put forward as the preeminent scripture of this dispensation, is fact or fable, history or just a story. Here's some numbers on how often the Mormon leadership uses the so-called qualifier. This is just since 1970. The Brethren utilize this form of ad hominem against science, current social issues, and of course, traditional Christian beliefs. In articles penned by Mormon prophets and Mormon apostles, 150 times. In church magazines, 521 times. In the church manuals, 140 times. Perhaps it's time that someone tells the so-called prophet and the so-called apostles that this is getting a little bit tired. Well, this concludes this edition of Critical Thinking for Mormons. Please tune in next time and we'll continue our examination of logical fallacies employed by leaders past and present of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, her apologists, as well as rank and file members. Until then, this is Paul Douglas wishing you all the very best.